My name's Meredith, the Sustainable Programs Officer at APCO, and supporting the team on ANZPAC. So today's session is really about you. It's about answering your questions, any questions that you have around ANZPAC, specifically to the Pacific Islands through the session. So just a few notes: if you haven't used Zoom before, please try and use headphones, make sure that they work, unlike mine, for the clarity of sound, and just keep yourself on mute for the time being. We'll have time for questions at the end of the session. Feel free to use the chat box and the chat function. That will allow you to say hello. That should just be on the next slide. So if you haven't used chat before, it should be just down at the bottom hand. And you can welcome to introduce yourself in there now if you'd like. So just put your name in and where you're joining us from. And yes, we will be recording this session. And I believe that we can share that with after as well. So please feel free to use the chat. A little bit of how we'll run the session today. So quick run through the agenda is what is ANZPAC and how will it work? I'll be speaking to you about that. Then we're going to hear directly from the Pacific Islands. So hearing from Dr. Christina Shaw, who is from the Vanuatu Environmental Science Society and is an ANZPAC member. And then we're also going to hear how the pact has worked in other countries. So we're really excited to have Tania Biggs from the Chilean Plastics Pact to give us a bit of a first-hand example of how pacts have worked in other countries. And then we'll have a good chunk of time for questions and answers as well. But before we get started, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land in which we all gather, wherever you may be joining us from. So from here in Sydney, we pay our respects to those elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge their connection to land and country. So what is ANZPAC and how will it work? So first and foremost, ANZPAC is part of a global plastics pact. So ANZPAC joins 11 pacts and over 1,000 other organizations that are united behind Ellen MacArthur Foundation's vision for an economy where plastic never becomes waste or enters the environment. So the Plastics Pact network has thousands of other organizations that are working towards these goals. We have great support coming from the other plastic pacts, like Antonia joining us here today. And why is that so important? So why is it important for us to come together, not just as a region, but to join a wider global network of plastics? And that's because we know we live in a global economy, but we also know that it's all about those local solutions, and we need to have that local knowledge and the local context to take real action on the ground. So that idea of local action happening in our small communities, then working that up through countries, through the region, and then connecting back into the wider global pact. And that's really where power and strength come from in terms of taking action on this wicked problem. So to be effective and to actually take some action, we really need to know what we're working towards. And that's why through the Plastics Pacts, there have been targets that are developed. So these are our regional targets that were developed, and that was through various conversations over the past year since the pact was first announced back in March of 2019. So the first target is to eliminate unnecessary and problematic plastic packaging through redesign, innovation, or alternative delivery methods. For example, that could be through reuse. Also, 100% of plastic packaging to be reusable, recyclable, or compostable by 2025. An increase in the current volume of plastic packaging that's collected and recycled by at least 25% for each geography within the ANZPAC region. That means increasing that plastic packaging that actually gets affected and making sure it is being recycled. And then the last target that we have is an average of 25% recycled content in plastic packaging across the region. And that's because we know if we're working to create this circular economy for plastics, to keep it out of our environments, that market demand is so incredibly important to create a market and to create that pull mechanism to pull plastics through. So those are the ANZPAC targets. How have we been going so far? So who else has already joined the pact? We've had great uptake coming out of Australia all across the plastics value chain. So business members, supporter members that include not-for-profits, industry associations, and other professional organizations. as well as government support. So we've been having fantastic conversations. The team here, Matilda and Helen and Leslie, have all been working really hard to work through these different channels and make sure that there's equal representation all through the plastics value chain, from packaging suppliers, raw material suppliers, reprocessing manufacturers, retailers, industry associations, government, and having everyone within this plastics chain is so critically important to achieving those targets and to accelerating this change to make it by 2025. So one of the key questions that's come up, and I imagine why you're here today, is how will my organization benefit from the pact? And of course, it's going to be different for every organization, but we've tried to really bucket this into a few different key areas that we think are the priority action areas for this region. So first and foremost, creating that market demand. We know that creating that pull mechanism for plastics that are getting collected, especially within the Pacific Islands, we need to create market demand and someone that will actually buy those back, and working through the different logistics and nuances within the region that are so important to create that market demand and to make sure that those plastics don't end up in landfill. The second is eliminating problematic and unnecessary items and implementing and scaling alternatives to reuse models. So how can we really work on some of these cool innovative things that can happen within the local context? Then the third area is looking at collection and recycling. So if that's the rolling out of new collection schemes, working closely potentially with governments or with industry to roll out that collection, but again, linking that back to market creation and recycling. And then the fourth is designing for reuse and recycling. And I think what's really exciting about this area is that there has been so much great progress made within the Pacific Islands, but also within New Zealand and within Australia around reuse and designing for reuse and recycling. So if we can share some of that knowledge, share some of the guidelines that have already been in practice for potentially a number of years around the region, we can all share that knowledge that much more. So what does Plastics Pact membership look like? Well, there are a few key areas that we'll be really jumping right into at the beginning. So a co-design for a regional roadmap will be coming through. So really understanding how are we as a region going to make it to the 2025 targets. The next is uniting behind the targets, so all working together. And that's really important. And we've learned that a little bit here in Australia through our work with the 2025 national packaging targets. If you understand what we're all working towards, it's really easy for you to communicate that to your customers, to communicate that to government, to communicate that to your suppliers, communicate that to your investors, and to be able to say, this is what we're working towards. We're part of a larger movement, and that helps to give you credence and also really give you the power to work towards those targets collectively in that support. There'll be a number of working groups that will be happening, breaking those off into specific areas around specific projects. There'll be access to global actions, networks, and expert knowledge. So tapping into the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the Plastics Pact wider area, there are a number of working groups that happen there, but also access to a number of different businesses all around the world that might be similar to you or might be in an area of the supply chain that you don't know as much about, but you'd like to learn more. And then last is that work on really practical initiatives and working together on targeted and specific projects. So one of the key functions that's also part of membership is a collective action group, or a CAG, which is a really fun acronym there. But the collective action group would be your steering committee, if you like. So the collective action group will consist of leading businesses, industry, government, civil society, all across the plastics value chain, making sure that there's that equal representation. So it's not too industry focused, not too government focused, not too academia or NGO. And then again, that there's that equal representation across the region, so from Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands. And this group will be looking after and also helping to represent your different regions on this wider steering committee and helping to develop through that roadmap towards meeting the 2025 targets. Another area that I mentioned before is around determining initiatives. Initiatives or projects, whatever you want to call them, they're basically targeted or specific projects that we'll be working towards that will be scalable, replicable, practical, and achievable. And again, the Plastics Pact is all about action. So how do we come together and take some action and to really create some different proof points, but also to solve some of the key issues that we find within the region. So projects will deliver on the targets, they'll have high impact and support a larger change and generate long-term collaboration and progress. So we have a few different projects that are already up and running since the beginning of the year around product stewardship here in Australia. And we're really committed to co-designing these different projects with all the members of the Pact. So within the Pacific Islands, within New Zealand, and if your organization has a project they're already working on, ANZPAC's also very open to supporting projects that may be running through your own organization. We can provide some of that expert advice and considerations. So that's a little bit of the frame up of ANZPAC and the Plastics Pact. But now I'm going to introduce Dr. Christina Shaw, who is a very impressive lady joining us from Vanuatu. Christina is the CEO of the Vanuatu Environmental Science Society Committee, VES, and is a Plastics Pact member. So Christina, if you're here, I'll go ahead and ask you a few questions.
Yes, hello, thanks Meredith for the introduction.
No worries. So I guess we might just start off with why you think the Plastics Pact is good for your organization.
Well, so for VES, in the Pacific Islands, there's a few organisations working, and quite often our scope for what we're doing is quite large. So, I mean, I work on threatened species, but I've also got involved in the plastics issue, particularly for the marine environment. And one of the things, as soon as you start working on something in the Pacific, you become the local expert. And I know what I don't know. So I think to be connected to people like yourselves that are the experts that do spend all of your time working on this area means that if I'm asked for advice or want to develop other projects or what have you, then it's very useful for me to have that connection to the expertise. My husband, who is also somewhere online, so I better say the right thing, runs Recycle Corp, which is the only recycling company in Vanuatu. And like many businesses in the Pacific, it's owner operated, and trying to find the time to do the research to develop new recycling things, products and what have you, is quite difficult, particularly when you're in a different, on an island and you're not in the midst of where the technology or where the expertise is. So having that connection to the people that are doing it already, whether it's in the businesses or whether it's you guys from APCO that can give us advice. And we've already, even though ANZPAC is quite new and we're only just getting membership up and running, we have already had advice from ANZPAC we've got an initiative to see if we can actually start recycling plastic bottles from Vanuatu, and just you've been able to give us the specifications of what the plastic needs to be able to be exported, how we can get it through quarantine, and some of those questions, and also connecting us with potential buyers of the plastics. So even though we've only been members for a very short period of time, we've already found you to be quite useful.
That's always great to hear. Seeing lots of smiling faces over here from the ANZPAC team. Well, that's really good to hear, Christina. And I think you've touched on this a little bit, but what are some of those key challenges that you face with plastics? And you've mentioned a bit how ANZPAC's helping to address it, but anything else that you build on from there?
Sorry, you cut out a little bit. Can you just repeat that?
Okay. So what are some of those key challenges that you face with plastics?
I think when you're in a small country, particularly a small island country with many islands, we've got enough plastics, particularly those that leak into the environments, to be a big problem. But we haven't got enough to be at big enough scale to be able to, collect them and sell them, and be economically viable, particularly with the cost of doing business here. So one of those challenges is to find the solutions and the technology that fits the scale of the Pacific Islands. And hopefully ANZPAC will be able to do that, especially with the connection to the global networks as well, because I'm sure there are people that have similar problems elsewhere that might have come up with the solutions. And yeah, so that, I think that's one of the biggest challenges. It's big enough to be a problem, but too small to be economically viable to do a lot with them, or to use the tech solutions that are come up with in some of the bigger countries. Yeah, so that's kind of a key challenge.
Yeah. And then what, I guess, do you find about that regional approach? What's really appealing about a regional approach to you?
Well, a lot of our plastic packaging is imported. So, and it's imported from the region, so Australia, New Zealand, and even Fiji as well. So if we want to look at a circular economy from where the plastics come from and sending it back to where it came from, then it's important to be connected to those markets. So not just for the plastic coming to us, but for potential markets of where we can send the plastic back to, particularly if we're working alongside those bigger corporate businesses that are producing a lot of the food and beverages or whatever, whatever the packaging is coming to us. If there's a extended responsibility, not just to their borders, but beyond to wherever their products are going, then I think the regional pact is a very good way of connecting everybody so that everything can become a little bit more circular.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, Christina. I'll ask you one final question here. It's just in case there are any other businesses, especially in the Pacific Islands, that you think might be on the fence about joining ANZPAC. Would you have any advice for them?
Well, I think one of the things that stands out about ANZPAC is we everywhere in the Pacific Islands, we see a lot of projects come through, a lot of plastic projects. And we those projects often have a short time scale, are designed outside the region, and we find that they don't actually do very much on the ground. So I'm hoping that ANZPAC seems to be different from that, in that it's not a finite timescale on the project. Yes, we have targets to work to at 2025, but there'll be new targets after that. As long as they're still members, there's still going to be ANZPAC and initiatives and that access to the expertise. So I think it's more of a long-term prospect. And also because it is a pact of members, we can design the initiatives and the projects from within rather than from somebody from outside saying this is what you should be doing. So I think that that's one of the benefits from being part of it, particularly sort of, you know, at the beginning you can actually have an influence, and you seem to be listening to what we say too. So that helps them to be, because there's lots of options as to what you want to be involved in. But I think the fact that it belongs to the membership, and yes, we are working towards these targets, but the way we do that, we can have a lot of influence in how that happens.
Absolutely. Very well said, Christina. Thank you so much for that. And if anyone has any questions for Christina, feel free to type them in the chat box. We'll have some time to answer those a little bit later on. But again, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us and hearing about the great work that you've been doing already. So we're next going to head, I would say across the pond, but it's really across the world, and give a nice warm welcome and hola to Tania Biggs, who is the director of the Chilean Plastics Pact, who's joining us this evening during a very busy time for her. So we really appreciate you being here, Tania. And we're just going to hear a little bit about Tania and some of the experiences that they've had within the Plastics Pact over in Chile.
Perfect. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, Tania. So we might just kick it off with a couple questions, if that's okay, and then we can just have a chat from there. So how does being a member of the Pact benefit organizations and businesses, I guess, from your experience in the Chilean Pact?
Well, we've discussed this with many times with the team and with my predecessor, Andrea Sino, and being part of the pact gives you guidance towards what actions to take and to prioritize, because you could be a bit overwhelmed with where to start, how to start. So it makes you focus on what actions and solution trends are being taken by businesses to solve challenges. So you can be right on track if you're part of the pact. And what's interesting, and we've seen with businesses, is some of them want to know what the other one is doing, and being part of the pact, you can know right away. They want to make sure who's moving forward, and can we move together? What are you doing? So if you have everybody at the table, this makes it really easy. And connection with policy, I think, is really key as well, and can be a benefit, because you can be speaking to authorities before regulation comes out. So you can be speaking about, for example, that's our case. We were speaking before the law of single-use plastics was presented to the Senate. We were already talking about this as a pact, and we were having this conversation, and we had advanced about what would be key elements to put on a single-use plastic law, and then we were able to present this to the Senate. So it prepares you for what policies can come later and influence policies that are being made. So this can be really interesting from our point of view for businesses. Communication-wide is great benefit as well. So if you dare to face this issue of plastic, and you're part of the pact, everything you do will be communicated throughout not only the pact, but all of our social media, etc. And you can communicate this with consumers, with your investors, with your clients, and you can also give this to your providers, right? So that your providers also can be aligned and in agreement to what steps you're taking. And the last point, I would say, for example, if you want to incorporate recycled material, right, you need a certain type of volume. So I think this was also something that Christina just talked about. And you won't be able to have the volumes by yourself. So you need to join forces with everybody else, create awareness with citizens, have enough volume. You need the experts. So you need the experts that are on the pact as well to see if it's feasible or not. So once again, if you're part of the pact, you have everybody right there. So this has just happened 2 weeks ago. We have a new member of the pact, and that's one of the reasons they came and said, where do I sign? I mean, they want to do things better. They have a internal sustainability policy. They want to implement things. They want to reduce their plastic, and they didn't want to go one by one with all the value chain. So they said, if I join the pact, I'm already with everybody, and this will be really easy to take the challenge.
Absolutely. No, I think that's really helpful, Antonia. And I think that's something I know from our experience here, at least in Australia, working with government. They really do. They love to see industry kind of being proactive. And by being part of the pact, that's sort of a proof point for them.
Exactly.
In terms of seeing that. And then you're exactly right. It opens those channels where you can have those conversations with government before regulation comes in, so that if that's where the path that they choose to take, at least it's the right regulations that will fit and will suit industry, making sure that we're working towards the right things. That's really helpful. My next question for you is around, how does the pact generate practical and faster actions or solutions for members and beyond?
Well, I think part of that question was answered before, but I would say again that you don't have to figure out everything by yourself. So if you're part of the pact, you will be able to see what things have worked in other countries, in other places, what has not worked, and then take action faster, right? And when I mention also take faster action, it's really important. And I think probably if you have meetings with the Ellen MacArthur Foundations, to have numbers. So if you have baselines, that's great, because actions by actions with no numbers and where you're at, you'll never know if you're reducing, you're recirculating, you're recycling, etc. So that's a point that I wanted to also make. But yeah, I think it's to be accompanied, right? You have everybody there. You can see what's going on. We have examples. We're working on flexibles in Chile, which is really difficult, but we feel more accompanied because we know Ellen MacArthur Foundation is also tackling small flexibles. So we're like, okay, we're not that far away, and all businesses in Chile are already sitting at a special table working on flexibles, and we can hear also what UK and Ellen MacArthur is doing, and see if we're on the same track, and try to work things out to make actions like precise actions, not to fail, right, in the long run. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the second question.
Absolutely, and you're right, and that goes back to one of the things too, that as a member, you do report on how you're tracking against those targets. And we always say that within APCO because there's a reporting function there, but it's what gets measured gets managed. If it's the same with anything, if it's exercise, whatever you're doing, if you know what you're doing, you can help to manage that better, decrease, be a bit more strategic with all of it. So I think that's really important. And Tania, I know you guys have been working in the innovation space as well. So we wanted to hear a little bit about how the Pact fosters innovation and collaboration as forces for that real systematic change.
Okay, well, if we think of the governance that we have in the Chilean Plastic Pact, we have the steering committee, the communication committee, the technical committee, and then we have 6 working groups. And one specific one, and it's called Open Innovation. So what we did the end of last year and the beginning of this year is we sat down with our businesses, with our members, and said, what is your biggest headache? Why aren't you able to recycle faster, more volumes? So tell me about it, and let's look together for the best innovation that we can find in Chile, in Latin America, or worldwide. And so we did this open innovation. We got 53 innovations in. We're evaluating them right now, so I don't have the full answer, but we probably have around 5 or 6 that match the headache that one of our businesses that the businesses have. So we can do the math and say, okay, please let's have a solution to the biggest headache you've had in the last time. So we try to generate this market to solve gaps. And internally in our pact, we have smaller businesses like Algramo or Ecocarga that started up as startups, but they give huge solutions to a group of our companies. For example, of selling by bulk. Yeah, I think that's the correct word, bulk. So Algramo works, for example, with Unilever. So it's huge interaction happening there, but that's small businesses with big companies, right? And I also wanted to point out that our targets, of course, are interconnected, right? So if you want to incorporate, for example, more recycled material in an inexpensive way with high quality and easy to get inputs, you need, again, to work together and to think about, okay, how am I going to do this? You need certain conditions. What are the conditions? Maybe I need a more transparent white, for example, bottle. So then you think, okay, the design. So that's innovation. I need innovation in design. How will I be able to homogenize the design of products to have a better input? And so for that, you need not a huge, but this is organically happens in the pacts. The coordination in the value chain is key, right? So same example could go for milk boxes. If they're all the same design, if you have an innovation design, you can collect them faster, right? Because for recyclers, it will be easier to see where they're at and take them back. And then the recycling market is generated, and the coordination between the companies. So just to give an example.
That's excellent. Thank you, Antonia. Really appreciate you being here with us today. We're going to transition now into our question and answer session. So I'm going to now introduce a couple additional people that will be joining us on the screen. So if we want to head over to our next slide. So why is the Regional Plastics Pact important? So we've got our chat box here. So we see a few people have been using the chat box already. Just a reminder, so you can find the chat function just down kind of in the center of your box. So feel free to pop any questions that you have in there now. I'd like to introduce Matilda Gable. So Matilda is the ANZPAC Plastics Pact coordinator, very passionate about plastics and has been absolutely instrumental to getting us to where we are today. So Matilda is going to be facilitating our question and answer session for everyone that you've heard from so far. And I'd also like to introduce Leslie Fox. So Leslie Fox is the Partnership and Development Officer here at APCO and has been doing fantastic work over the past year and a half, getting the Plastics Pact to where it is, working closely with global and regional partners here. So welcome Matilda and Leslie. And Matilda will hand over to you to ask some questions. And again, just feel free to pop those into the chat box. If not, we have a couple to start us off with as well. Matilda.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Antonia and Christina. It's been really interesting hearing from you. As we mentioned, pop your questions into that chat box and we can get those answered. We do have a really great question, which I feel has already been touched on, but we'll ask it again. And Meredith, this might be one for you. So we've had a question that's come up quite regularly, which is about how will ANZPAC be different to other plastic projects and programs across the region?
Yeah, excellent. So I think Christina did mention it before a little bit, but I'll just to reiterate that ANZPAC really, it's about listening first and foremost, I think, to everyone within the region. It's about understanding what some of those key priorities are, what some of those key initiatives that you see that are absolutely critical to meeting the 2025 targets and working towards that. And also ANZPAC we're in it for the long game. We've got to 2025 in terms of the targets, but that means also we can continue to do projects. Would love to be able to continue to work as a region on plastics beyond 2025 as well. And I think also it's different because of that kind of, we look at the local context, where it be if it's just within a city or a township, then looking if it's a state or an island level, then looking by country. But then for all of us to come together as a region and really acknowledging the fact that there's so much of a shared value chain within the region. And then that also scales up to how we interact with plastics and the global value chain as well. So I think that's really exciting, and it's all about that collective impact, working together and really making sure that all the voices are heard. We know if we want to accelerate this work, that we don't want to be duplicating efforts. So there's a lot of great work that's already happened in each of the different regions, but how can we continue to work together and to scale up that work instead of duplicating the wheel?
Thank you, Meredith. And if anyone's happy to turn on your cameras, we'd love to see your faces. We do have another question that's regularly asked, and it's around the membership fee and how that's quite a big investment for many members and organisations across the region. So this is probably one for you, Leslie. And the question that comes up is, the membership fee, it is quite a big investment for some companies, and we're just wondering what value for the business does that give you being a part of the pact and paying that membership fee?
Okay, thank you, Matilda. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. So yes, yeah, wonderful to be here and to see some very familiar faces again. Absolutely fantastic to be here. And as we get in the lead up to the launch, it's fantastic to see the number of members coming on board and to answer these questions and to hear about all the organizations who are interested in joining. So really appreciate the opportunity to speak to a lot of you guys again. So yeah, in terms of the membership fee, so we did think long and hard about what the membership fee structure should be like, and we looked at the economic analysis of it. We looked at different plastic pacts and different things like that in order to come to a consensus about what we felt would be the membership fee for the Pacific Islands, well, for the whole Plastics Pact, to be honest. So there was a lot of consideration put into it. And in regards to the value that you can get from it, I mean, I think a lot of it was talked about Antonia and Christina earlier. But just to remind a few points which I think are really key for you to understand is that really about being part of the Plastics Pact is about delivering actions and delivering actions on a long term. And that's one thing I really like about the Plastic Pact is that because it is made up of members, paid for by members, it's not a small project that will be delivered over 6 months. We're here for the long term. So this would be a long-term project that will be going on and on in order to basically get long-term sustainable outcomes in terms of plastic, elimination of plastic and its impact on the environment. It's all about joining forces also with the whole packaging supply chain, large organizations, multinationals, that obviously have a lot of input, as Christina said, of importing packaging into the Pacific Islands. So obviously by joining forces with them, we can make a significant change as well. It is all about action. So we are working to find solutions, practical, tangible solutions that we can actually implement on the ground. And we wanted to make it work and be achievable. So this is the aim that we want to provide for members within the pact. We also are working strongly, and this is based on experience of this collaboration between government and members and industry, in order for us to make change. Industry and government do need to work together, and we know this from experience. So we're very much a part of making sure that things aren't done in isolation and that all key stakeholders are involved in the decision-making process, so that because one will impact the other, and so it's essential that everybody is talking together. So we're keen to obviously make that a part of that, so you can feel confident in being a member that your message, your opinions and messages will be heard by the people who will be in the end putting decisions in place. Obviously opening up to new markets for packaging. We're keen to, as we know, packaging comes into the Pacific Islands, but it needs to go, we want it to go to a more sustainable source, and like for recycled content. So we're keen to obviously get connections to expanded markets for used packaging as well. And yes, that's just to name but a few of the value things that I feel might be most relevant. Really, the list is quite long, and we're already starting to see the benefits of some of the actions of members being involved already. So I'm keen to tell you all about it, but I'll give you back to Matilda for the next question.
Thanks, Leslie. Yeah, it's really exciting to see, the different members that are coming on and working with them uniquely and individually, as Christina touched on as well. Another question that comes through quite often, and this is one that I think, Meredith, you'll be able to shed some light on, is, for small businesses, if I'm a small business and don't necessarily feel that I can afford the membership, how else can I get involved or be involved with ANZPAC?
It's a great question. And I think first and foremost, it's understanding, like Leslie just mentioned, the value for your business and all these different benefits that are coming there. But we are conscious, especially with last year's situation with COVID, that a lot of businesses are maybe not in the place that you would have been 18 months or so ago. So if your business is really worried about that membership fee, something I'd really encourage you to do is work with your local network. So there are two types of membership. One is a member fee for businesses and anyone that's in the plastics value chain, and that's a paid membership. But there is an ANZPAC supporter membership, and that's open to government, to industry associations, and to academia. So if you are a member of an industry association or a trade association, I'd really encourage you to bring that up with the industry association and with your other businesses, potentially competitors or others that are within that group, and to talk about that and encourage your industry association to join up to ANZPAC, and then you can continue to work together through those industry associations as well, and to work towards the targets and to continue to get some of that knowledge out of there as well.
Thank you, Meredith. And Tania, I know that you touched on this in your Q&A before, but I suppose we were just wondering, if you can think of one, exciting example or benefit of a member from either the Chilean or another Plastic Pact, just from a practical example perspective, if there's anything that comes to mind.
You mean a benefit?
Yeah.
Is that correctly? I heard correctly.
Yeah.
I would say one benefit I've seen very recently is the collaboration, for example, between two members of the pact that had never seen each other before they were members. So it's an NGO and a huge mall that works along Chile. Chile is very long. So they're doing a project, very citizen engaged, and they're starting now in March. They're going to recollect volumes of flexibles, which is very difficult. So they're going to test. They're going to have numbers, and not only that, the recollection, etc., to teach and to teach citizens how to do this, how to recollect correctly, how to put them in bottles, etc. But then the NGO has all the expertise and can transform this into pellets, and then do infrastructure for children's park. So it's one model that I can think of right now that they both benefit, because it's the recollection will also be what the malls are put in the market, not put in the market in this sense, but that have, or the problems they have in the local areas where they are in the country. So some of the benefits I've seen is in that sense, that they collaborate in certain things that they wanted to do, but they didn't know how, or they didn't have the expertise, or they didn't have the volumes, etc. So they're working together right away is faster. Some of the big companies also, well, the case I showed you between Algramo, which sells in bulk and is working with Unilever. They started very slowly with some products, and now they've gone huge, and they're working with tons of other products that they can sell in bulk, right? So those type of collaborations that are set out right away probably wouldn't be this easy if they were not both in the pact, sitting at the same tables or having the same conversations in our working groups.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Antonia. I mean, we know that collaboration is absolutely key, and that's really one of the underlying principles of ANZPAC. And as Christina mentioned, she's already starting to experience that, and we've had the privilege of working with a few of the local businesses there, and it's amazing. So thank you for that. A bit more of a practical question, I suppose, and Meredith, this is probably a good one for you. If you are coming on board as an ANZPAC member, just in terms of that resource and time commitment, I know that can be a bit of a hold up for people, but just wondering how much time and capacity is required.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one that's come up a lot. It's how much am I going to have to actually do if I become a member? And part of that is really up to you a little bit. So I think understanding what you put in is what you're going to get out of it, anything like this. So there's working groups. So if your organization was to be part of the collective action group, there's obviously a bit more of a bigger time commitment to those meetings. If you want to participate in working groups, then those are looking at potentially being run on a quarterly basis. So a couple hours a quarter. Then there's also opportunities to join EMF, so Ellen MacArthur Foundation wider Plastic Pact calls that are about specific topics. There's going to be resources, a little bit of a membership hub that you can go in and learn different things about. And then also working on specific initiatives. So it's again how much you want to put out and how much you want to get out of your membership. But there'll be different opportunities within the working groups, within the collective action group, and then on specific initiatives. Otherwise, a lot of that will be again hosted online. So we know everyone's busy, so you can go back and refer to a lot of things if you miss it during a certain time.
Yeah, great. Great. I think it's one of those, at the beginning, we've got the roadmap, we've got working groups and lots to establish. So we're looking forward to all the members who are involved at the beginning to be really, put as much in as they're willing to put. And then, it is as much as you're wanting to put in, as Meredith said. Does anyone else have any questions? We'd love to hear from you. It's been really great speaking to you. Always feel free to send us an email or reach out in any way. If we don't have any more questions, we're probably about time to show you some next steps, and I can pass that back over to Meredith. All righty. Well.
Great. Well, yeah, feel free, like Matilda mentioned, if you ever want to get in touch, if there's anything else that you have any further questions on that you didn't want to share with the wider group, we'll pop up the ANZPAC email here in a second, and you can always email that through to the team, or Matilda, Helen, myself, Leslie. We're always happy to also have a meeting with you and kind of discuss anything else and how it fits into potentially the work that you're doing as well. So just in terms of next steps, we have a few exciting things in the pipeline. So I guess ANZPAC, to recap, it's really about that regional intervention. So coordinating our actions. We know there's lots of great things happening in the Pacific Islands, in New Zealand, in Australia, but it's all of us coming together so that we have that stronger voice on the global platform and that we're plugging into what's happening in the global context of everything. Plastics and plastics waste is already traded and traveling across our borders. We know that we're living in really a global economy. So ANZPAC provides that framework to improve the quality, consistency, and recovery of the plastics and eliminate some of those problematic materials that are causing real environmental problems. And then it's about that true collaboration. It goes back to working towards those targets. We're working towards them in a very clear manner. We know what we're working towards. We'll be measuring and monitoring how we progress that, but also having good continuous communication and really working to understand what's happening in the local context and that true collaboration working together. So ANZPAC in our region, in the Pacific Islands, it really offers an opportunity for islands to unite those key decision makers, like we've talked about, between government, NGO, businesses across the region, from plastic manufacturers, brand owners, collectors, and exporters. It's that key focus on plastics, where we know that we need to really accelerate this change. We've all heard that statistic around by 2040, there could be more plastic in the ocean than fish. And us as Oceania and as this coastal region, we know that impacts all of us really closely. So we can't have that happen. We know that we need to accelerate this change. We can grow some of these really practical projects that I can't say, and then we can accelerate those and scale them up and share some of those key learnings into the Plastic Pact network, have new solutions, new funding opportunities, and really influence government waste policies for manufacturers, brand owners, and create new reuse schemes and recycling systems. And we can use our expertise and experiences. I think that's one thing I've learned over the course of just working in this for the past few years in Australia, is that you never know when you're going to learn something from another industry or from someone else. And that can really kind of change your perspective and potentially open up new opportunities. So it's about understanding what we're all working towards, having those conversations, and being open to the fact that someone might be opening a new door for you at any point in time. So what can we do next? I guess if you haven't joined ANZPAC just yet, please feel free to get in touch. Like I said, we'll put the ANZPAC email up here in a second. And so please join the pact, or if you think going through an industry association or a wider body is important, have that conversation with them. and get involved. You can also express your interest in joining the collective action group or some of the working groups. And then let's have a party. So the last part is we formally are launching the Pact on May 18th. So right now, really looking for businesses, academia, government, everyone to come on board and to be part of the Pact. But we'll be having a bit of a launch party. We'll be having an event here in Sydney, one in New Zealand, and encouraging everyone in the local context to have a bit of a launch party themselves. And we'll provide you with a bit of a kit, and we can all pop open some bubbly and celebrate the launch of the Pact and working towards these targets together. So before we go, I may just ask Antonia and Christina, just if you had any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the group before we all log off.
Sure.
Antonia, maybe we'll start with you.
Well, yes, I would encourage to join the Pact as soon as possible. I mean, collaboration's key. No one will make it by themselves, and you will have all the key players right on board at a WhatsApp call. So it will be really easier to work together to really have or not have a linear plastic production, but a circular one. So I would encourage to engage as soon as possible.
Fantastic. Thanks, Antonia. And Christina, any final thoughts from you?
I think I'll just mirror what Antonia has said, that, I mean, I'm looking forward to working collectively with the other people in the region, and find that it's much easier. You know, some people want to be the leaders and put their head above the parapet, but it's often a lot easier if you can all go down that path together, without having to think about the implications of what will happen if you go it alone. So yeah, I think working together and having that access to expertise, either in the wider groups such as calls like this, or also that one-on-one access when you have your business. You don't have to have the conversations with everybody. You do have that access to people if there are things that are more commercially sensitive or what have you with your businesses, and you want some advice and you don't want to go into the public forum, then they are also available for that sort of advice as well. So it's working together to the targets, but without having to reveal everything about your business. If there are things that are sensitive, then that will be respected as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Christina. Well, thank you both for joining us, Antonia, from far away and late at night. So we do appreciate you being here. Yes, and Fafahete, to your question there around discussions between ANZPAC and SPRESS, yes, those have been happening, and we're having very close conversations with them and intend to work quite closely together with ANZPAC as well in the future. So very important to have SPREP as part of this work in future. So great, thank you all. Please feel free to pop any further questions in. You can see the email address there. Thanks again, and we look forward to working with you in ANZPAC.